Firstly, I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty.
A single signature behind closed palace doors is being claimed to have changed the royal family's future forever. But what really happened, and what does it actually mean? Today, we take a closer look at the reports, the palace speculation, and the questions surrounding Princess Anne, King Charles, Prince Harry, and Meghan in one of the most talked-about royal stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Royal Storyline UK, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into the story. I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that. I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. The words left his mouth without any ceremony, yet they tore through the royal family like a constitutional thunderclap that no one could ignore. Prince William had authorized the removal of Harry's Duke of Sussex title and ordered the Sussex household permanently excluded from every private royal residence. Within minutes, locked doors canceled permissions, and one devastating phone call transformed a family rupture into an irreversible royal exile. Before we go any deeper into what this truly means for the brothers and the crown, take a second to like this video and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. William sat alone with the decree before him. His fingers rested beside the signature line, as though the page carried every year he and Harry had stood together through grief and duty, and the quiet weight of expectation. A royal decree was a formal written order carrying the authority of the crown, and this one did more than remove a title. It cut the younger brother off from Windsor's family apartments, Balmoral's private quarters, Sandringham house, and every residence where royal life continued beyond the reach of cameras. The prince whispered Harry's name, closed his eyes, and pressed the pen down. The decision struck at memory as much as privilege. Those houses held Christmas mornings soft with firelight and the scent of pine grief that had once bound them, side by side, childhood arguments that ended in shared laughter, and the last traces of Diana's presence still lingering in quiet corners. Harry was not merely losing rooms. He was losing the physical map of the life that shaped him. That was why the order felt colder than any public rebuke, and why William's silence became unbearable once the ink dried. Harry answered the encrypted call, expecting another temporary restriction, something that could still be negotiated or softened. He listened, asked for the wording to be repeated, and froze when the official said permanent. Meghan watched as he lowered the phone, but she did not speak until he said Windsor, Balmoral, and Sandringham were gone to them. The Duke title had vanished. Yet losing those places wounded him more deeply, because they connected him to family moments no statement could replace. The decree carried a darker layer, a private annex, meaning a confidential section attached to the main order, instructed palace security to deactivate Sussex access credentials before the announcement reached the world. Charles had already read the document. The king neither blocked it nor asked William to delay, proving the future monarch was acting with silent approval from the throne. Then a senior courtier reached the final page and stopped. One clause cited a final breach of private family trust. Words suggesting public criticism was never the true cause. Something hidden had happened behind royal doors, and it had driven William beyond anger into punishment. But to understand why William chose punishment over reconciliation, the private wounds carried by William, Harry, Meghan, and Charles must first be brought into the light. Long before the decree divided them legally, William and Harry had already become strangers, bound by blood, memory, and resentment. One brother carried the future of the monarchy on his shoulders. The other believed the institution had sacrificed him to protect itself. Between them stood Meghan Catherine and a father whose silence had become more painful than any public statement. William understood that Harry was no longer simply a wounded brother speaking from anger. Every fresh dispute now tested the future king's authority and threatened the stability he believed George, Charlotte, and Louis would one day inherit. As heir, meaning the person next in line to the throne, the prince carried responsibility for protecting both the institution and the family living inside it. Yet the more firmly he defended the crown, the further he seemed to move from the brother who had once stood beside him through grief. Catherine found him holding an old photograph taken at Balmoral, where the brothers had once appeared inseparable, two boys with the same bright eyes and the same stubborn set to their jaws. She watched his expression tighten before gently asking whether he was certain the decree was the only choice. William did not look away from the picture. He told her certainty had disappeared years earlier, and all that remained was responsibility. The princess heard resolve in his voice, but she also heard loss, because he was not choosing victory. He was choosing the wound he believed the monarchy could survive. Across the Atlantic, Meghan reached for Harry after the encrypted call ended, but he stepped away and stared at another photograph of himself and William as boys standing close enough that their shoulders touched. His title had been one of the last official links to his mother's world. While access to Windsor, Balmoral, and Sandringham had preserved a fragile connection to childhood, the Duke of Sussex was a hereditary royal title traditionally linked to rank and public identity. But for Harry, it had also carried memory. When he realized Archie and Lilibet might never enter the private rooms he once called home, anger gave way to grief that settled deep in his chest and made it hard to breathe. Charles read the decree alone and stopped at the paragraph excluding his younger son from Sandringham. His hands trembled, yet the king signed no objection and requested no delay. Camilla later learned through a confidential household briefing that William had demanded the strictest wording possible, removing automatic exceptions for funerals, emergencies, or private invitations, unless the sovereign gave formal approval. She understood then that the prince had not merely closed a door. He had locked every informal path around it. A palace advisor remembered something troubling. Only weeks earlier, William had resisted this exact punishment and argued that one final chance should remain. Something had changed him completely. That event occurred behind closed doors during a gathering intended to repair the family, yet instead it became the moment every path back to royal life was destroyed. The final rupture did not begin with a television interview, a memoir, or a public accusation. It began inside Balmoral during a private family reconciliation meeting where phones were forbidden, aides were dismissed, and every person present had agreed that nothing said would leave the room. By sunrise, William believed that sacred promise had been deliberately broken. Charles had arranged the gathering as one final attempt to rescue what remained of his family. Balmoral was not simply a royal estate. It was the private Scottish home where generations of the family had escaped public duty and spoken without official ceremony, the air thick with the scent of heather and wood smoke, the rooms quiet enough that a single word could carry. The king wanted Harry, Meghan, and their children to regain limited access, but only if trust could be restored away from press teams, lawyers, and prepared statements. He believed that bringing both sons into the same room might succeed where public appeals had failed. William entered with caution written into every word. He agreed to consider private visits for Harry's family, but only under strict confidentiality, meaning nothing discussed could be recorded, published, or used in any commercial project. The prince had already watched private pain become public material, and he refused to place Catherine or their children inside that cycle again. Harry listened without interrupting, then said he wanted Archie and Lilibet to know George, Charlotte, and Louis as family rather than distant names. For one fragile moment the tension eased. William's guarded expression softened, and Charles allowed himself to believe the brothers had finally reached something honest. Harry repeated that he did not want another generation to inherit their anger. The king watched both sons carefully, holding onto that sentence as proof that reconciliation might still be possible. Mourning destroyed the illusion. William received a confidential transcript containing Catherine's private comments about shielding their children from public family conflict. He carried the pages to her and watched her read the exact words she had spoken behind a closed door. The princess felt exposed, but the betrayal cut deeper because the meeting had been presented as safe. She asked how anyone could have captured the conversation, and he had no answer that did not lead back to Harry. Then the source emerged. A documented production file from an unreleased Sussex media project contained audio taken from the Balmoral gathering, despite the explicit no recording agreement. Harry insisted during a recorded call that he had never authorized the material's inclusion and did not know how it entered the project archive. William heard the denial, but responsibility no longer mattered to him. The promise had been broken inside a private royal home, and Catherine's words had become evidence of that breach. William ended the call and ordered a final meeting at Windsor. He took the leaked transcript, placed it beside an unsigned decree, and prepared to confront the brother he no longer trusted. At Windsor, there would be no cameras, advisors, or carefully edited statements. Only two brothers, one unsigned decree, and a truth neither could escape. The room was deliberately small, chosen to prevent distance and deny escape. William entered holding a red folder. Harry arrived without an aide. For several seconds, neither brother sat down. Then William placed the leaked transcript on the table and asked a question that carried years of anger beneath it. Was anything between us ever meant to remain private? Harry recognized the Windsor sitting room immediately. The brothers had spoken there after their grandfather's funeral, when grief had briefly forced them into the same quiet space, the walls still holding the echo of that earlier silence. Windsor was more than a royal residence. It was a working castle and private family home, where official duty and personal life existed behind the same walls. That history made the meeting cruelly intimate. William had not chosen a grand chamber. He had chosen a room filled with memories neither man could ignore. William told him the confrontation was not about newspaper headlines or wounded pride. The prince said the real issue was whether private royal spaces could remain safe for Catherine, their children, and anyone who trusted Harry enough to speak freely. If conversations from Balmoral could enter a media archive, then every family meeting became a possible recording session. Harry pushed the transcript back across the table and repeated that he had never approved its use. William did not move. He answered that every crisis now arrived with the same defense. Someone else made the decision. Someone else leaked the material. Someone else misunderstood the promise. Harry heard accusation in every word and rose so sharply that the chair scraped behind him. He accused his brother of using the future crown to punish the one person who had refused to remain silent about the institution. William stood as well, but his voice became quieter. He said silence and betrayal were not the same thing. The future king reminded Harry that Catherine's private fears had been captured after everyone agreed the room was secure. He could forgive criticism, anger, even rejection. He could not ask his wife and children to keep trusting a brother who no longer controlled where their words went. The red folder changed everything. William opened it and revealed the prepared decree, a formal written order carrying royal authority. He offered one final choice. Harry could surrender the Duke title voluntarily and preserve a narrow private relationship outside official royal life. Harry stared at the document, then refused what he called a forced confession disguised as mercy. Harry asked whether Charles had approved the ultimatum. William paused long enough for the answer to become clear before saying their father had been informed and had chosen not to intervene. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Harry reached the door, but William delivered one final warning. Once the decree was signed, the security order would begin immediately, and no private invitation or family promise could reverse it. Harry left believing William had seized power, but behind the decree stood a carefully constructed chain of authority that made resistance almost impossible. William's signature carried emotional force, but emotion alone could not close royal residences, cancel credentials, or erase a dukedom from palace use. Behind the decree stood lawyers, security chiefs, senior household officials, and most painfully a father who allowed his elder son to finish what he could not bring himself to begin. Charles met William privately before the final document was released. The king had already delegated limited authority to his heir, meaning he had formally allowed the prince to act on his behalf in matters tied to household security and future royal stability. That power was coordinated through the royal household, the officials who managed the monarch's duties and residences, along with estate trustees and private security administrators. Every step had been prepared to make the order immediate and difficult to challenge. Charles asked whether there was any softer option left. William answered without hesitation that every softer option had already been tried, delayed, negotiated, and eventually broken in public. The prince reminded his father that family access had repeatedly been treated as proof of trust, only for private conversations to become material for wider projects. The king heard the argument, but he also heard the finality beneath it. Charles turned away because he could not face his elder son. After a long silence, he told William to protect the monarchy. Then his voice dropped. "Do not pretend it will not cost you your brother." The future king said nothing, because both men already understood the price. Anne reviewed the Balmoral security file through a documented household briefing and supported the residence ban. The princess, royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, argued that a private home could not remain private if confidential family conversations might become content. She believed the issue had moved beyond hurt feelings. It had become a question of whether anyone inside the family could still speak without fear. Catherine challenged one part of the decree. She urged William to remove a harsher clause that would have barred Harry from royal funerals and memorial services. The princess reminded him that grief should never become another weapon between the brothers. He resisted at first, then agreed. The order remained severe, but her intervention preserved one narrow piece of mercy. The title's removal now stood as a formal royal determination within this dramatized account, while the residence restrictions would be enforced through private estate rules and household security orders. That distinction mattered because one action stripped public rank, while the other closed the personal spaces that had once made Harry feel like a son and brother. Then one palace official broke protocol. Through a confidential call, he warned the Sussex household that security had not yet received the final instruction. Harry and Meghan had only minutes to request the release of personal belongings still held in royal storage. Those few minutes triggered panic on both sides of the Atlantic as the decree stopped being a threat on paper and became a physical reality of locks, boxes, and doors that would no longer open. The fallout began not with a grand announcement but with a small red light flashing on a security terminal. One by one, the Sussex access permissions disappeared. At Windsor, staff sealed a private storage room containing photographs, clothing, letters, and objects Harry had left behind. Thousands of miles away, he realized that exile could be measured in ordinary possessions. Security teams moved quickly. Digital passes were canceled. Guest protocols were rewritten. Estate managers were notified, and every informal family permission vanished from the official system. A guest protocol was the set of rules deciding who could enter royal property and under what conditions, in Harry's name had now been moved from family access to controlled approval. He could still attend authorized state occasions, but he could no longer enter private residential areas simply as a son, brother, or family guest. Harry called a former equerry and asked about one small box. An equerry was a trusted royal aide who handled personal duties and sensitive arrangements, and this man had once helped him move private belongings between residences. The prince asked whether letters from Diana could be retrieved before the inventory began. The aide hesitated, then confirmed that the room had already been sealed. Harry repeated the question slower this time, but the answer did not change. Meghan watched him pace through their home, his anger growing with every unanswered call. She told him William could remove a title, cancel a pass, and close a gate, but he could not erase who Harry was. He stopped and answered that the decree had not erased him. It had erased the place where he belonged. Meghan reached for him again, and this time he let her hold his hand, though neither of them knew what could still be recovered. A staff member at Frogmore found something unexpected behind stored furniture, a framed photograph of William and Harry taken years before the family fracture. Instead of placing it in the removal crate, the employee sent it privately to the future king with a brief documented note explaining where it had been found. The image arrived just after security confirmed that every Sussex credential had been deactivated. William looked at the photograph for several seconds. He turned it face down, but he did not destroy it or return it. The prince had completed the order exactly as planned, yet the small act exposed what the decree could not remove. His resolve remained firm, but grief still lived beneath it. That evening, Charles requested a private call with Harry. The king insisted there would be no Meghan, no William, no secretaries, and no lawyers. Only father and son would speak before the announcement became public. With the machinery of exile already moving, Charles and Harry were left with one last private hour to decide whether anything human could survive what the monarchy had done. There were no courtiers on the call and no statement waiting to be released. Charles spoke first, not as king, but as a father who understood that every formal word had arrived too late. Harry listened in silence until Charles made one final offer. Surrender the public battle, protect the family's private conversations, and a personal relationship might still survive outside palace walls. Charles kept the call completely private. No secretary prepared his words, no lawyer softened the meaning, and no palace official stood ready to interrupt. The king told Harry that he would not overturn William's decree, because doing so would weaken the heir's authority and reopen the security crisis created by the Balmoral recording. An heir's authority meant the recognized power of the person next in line to lead and protect the monarchy. If Charles publicly reversed his elder son, now every future decision from William would appear uncertain. Harry asked the question he had carried since Windsor. Did his father truly believe he had deliberately betrayed the meeting? Charles paused before answering. He said he did not believe Harry entered Balmoral planning to expose the family, but he did believe his younger son had lost control of the people, projects, and promises surrounding him. The king's words were quiet, yet they cut deeply. Intent could not repair what Catherine had felt when her private fears appeared in a transcript. Harry answered that leaving royal life had been the only way to protect Meghan and their children. Charles did not challenge that choice. Instead, he admitted that excluding his son from Sandringham felt like locking away part of his own life. The monarch remembered Christmas morning's family walks and the years before every conversation became a test of loyalty. His voice broke on the final sentence, and Harry's anger softened, because, for once, his father sounded wounded rather than official. Charles then offered a compromise that no document had mentioned. Harry, Archie, and Lilibet could meet him on neutral private property outside royal residences, but every encounter would remain unrecorded, unpublished, and untouched by commercial projects. Neutral property meant a private location with no formal connection to crown estates or household access. The arrangement would preserve contact without reopening the doors William had closed. Harry accepted the condition for his children. He wanted them to know their grandfather without cameras, statements, or negotiations, yet he refused to ask for the Duke title back. For the first time, he separated his identity from the rank he had carried for years. Charles heard the decision and understood that his son was not returning to royal life, even if a narrow family bond survived. Minutes later, the palace released the announcement. The private reckoning became a global spectacle, praised as necessary discipline by some, and condemned as unforgivable cruelty by others. What had been whispered behind palace doors now erupted across screen streets and headlines, forcing the world to choose what William's decree represented. By dawn, the family's private collapse had become the only story Britain could see. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled programming, newspaper presses replaced prepared front pages, and crowds gathered outside Windsor's gates. Some praised William for defending the crown. Others saw a brother using royal power to erase another. One photograph captured the division more powerfully than any palace statement. The palace response arrived in a brief written announcement with no apology and no invitation for debate. Harry's dukedom had been removed under the dramatized decree, while every Sussex permission to enter private royal residences had ended after the collapse of confidential family arrangements. A dukedom was a senior hereditary rank granted by the crown, carrying status, identity, and a formal place within royal life. Its removal told the public that this punishment reached far beyond a family disagreement. William watched the first broadcast beside Catherine and did not speak as commentators argued over his decision. Supporters called the decree a necessary boundary after repeated breaches of trust. Critics said hereditary power, the authority passed through a royal bloodline, had been turned into a weapon against a wounded brother. When the presenter called him the prince who exiled his brother, he lowered the volume but refused to leave. Catherine stayed beside him, knowing he needed to hear the judgment he had chosen to face. Harry watched the same coverage from California until archival footage of him walking behind Diana's coffin appeared beneath the breaking news banner. His face hardened. The prince switched off the television and told Meghan that his childhood grief had once again become public currency. She reminded him the broadcast could not define his future, but he answered that the world was using the most painful moment of his past to explain a decision made decades later. Rain fell outside Windsor as the London Herald rose above the crowd, its front page showing the castle's closed iron gates beneath two enormous words, "No way home." Some cheered William's resolve. Others accused the monarchy of cruelty. A former royal aide appeared live and said, "This is not merely the loss of a title, it is the formal death of the old brotherhood." The phrase spread worldwide within minutes. William heard it, left the room, and began writing a private message to Harry, not to restore the title or reverse the decree, but to define what remained when rank and privilege had disappeared. When the noise finally receded, the decree stayed exactly where William had placed it. Signed, enforced, irreversible. Harry was no longer Duke of Sussex. The private gates were closed. William refused every request to reconsider. He wrote to Harry by hand, placed the old Balmoral photograph inside the envelope, and sealed it without asking for forgiveness. Harry read the note alone, then carried the photograph to Archie and Lilibet and pointed to the boy beside him. "That was their uncle," he said, "a man he had once trusted with every fear and every memory." Charles later met Harry and the children on neutral private property. No cameras, no advisors. The king greeted them as a grandfather. William chose not to attend. The decree succeeded politically. It secured the residences and strengthened royal authority, yet it failed to preserve the brotherhood that had once held them together after Diana's death. One brother began building an identity beyond royal rank. The other accepted that leadership sometimes meant closing a door he privately wished had never opened. The decree stood. The gates remained closed. Both brothers walked forward carrying different versions of the same irreversible loss.